Good evening, class. Let's pray first. Can you hear me?
Yes, Judge.
Yes po, Judge.
Let's pray first. Can you hear me, class?
Yes,
Yes,
Judge.
Judge.
Thank you. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit, amen. Almighty God, is standing in holy presence as our supreme judge. We humbly beseech you to bless and inspire us so that we think, say, and do will be in accordance with your will. Enlighten our minds, strengthen our spirit, and fill our hearts with the love, wisdom, and understanding, so that we can become effective channels of truth, justice, and peace. In our proceedings today, guide us in the path of righteousness for the fulfillment of your greater glory. Amen. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Good evening, class.
Good evening, Judge.
Good evening, Judge.
Good
evening,
po.
Judge.
Kung may pa-virtual background kayo, yun ang paandar for the last day. Okay. So, for a while, I'll just get the list of students for today. So, who are going to recite today? Still the batch of Robles?
Yes, Judge.
So, we're going to start with application of graduation of penalties. But before that, let me just remind you of the penalty for impossible crimes. Because some of you answered in the prelims that there's no liability because it resulted in an impossible crime. Take note, class, an impossible crime is a crime. It's just called impossible crime of murder or impossible crime of some other thing, some other real crime that is capable of getting executed. So the penalty for impossible crimes is found in Article 59. So it's the penalty of arresto mayor or a fine.
Judge,
Yes.
we have a few blockmates who are affected by the typhoon, so they couldn't attend the class today. Would it be okay if we requested for a copy of the recording?
Are they from the Visayas? Are they staying there
Yes, Judge.
right now?
Yes, Judge.
Okay, I'll just send you a copy of today's recording.
Thank you, Judge.
Because the topics for today would be about the penalties and the application of the graduation of penalties. So it would be asked in the final exam. Okay, so that's Article 59. We go now in Article 61. So let me just share. Article 61 class is the rules for graduating penalties. You have to take note of the terminologies. When you say degree, it's the whole of the penalty. So as provided in the graduation of penalties. Here, can you see the share?
Yes, Judge.
Okay. So when we say you're going to lower down the penalty by degree, so if it's, for example, it's reclusion temporal, the lower degree would be, if it's in its entirety, it's prison mayor. So we have the rules in Article 61. I want you to go to your codal or your books and go to Article 61. So paragraph 1 of Article 61 says that it provides for a single and indivisible penalty. When we say single and indivisible penalty, it can either be dalawa lang yan. It's either death or reclusion perpetua. So, for example, the penalty prescribed by law is death, and so the penalty next lower in degree is just reclusion perpetua. So, that's for paragraph 1. And also it provides for if the penalty consists of a single divisible. So we only have 2 indivisible penalties. It's death and reclusion perpetua. The rest are divisible. When we say divisible class, you can divide the penalty into 3 periods. So we have here, you look at the screen, we have maximum, medium, and minimum periods. The duration for each penalty can be found in Article 7, the table can be found in Article 77. Okay. So if the penalty provides for a single divisible penalty, so for example, it's reclusion perpetua, reclusion temporal rather. If it's one divisible penalty in its full extent, so that's in paragraph 2. If it's in its full extent, the next lower in degree is prison mayor. Okay? Yun lang yung susunod na penalty. So if it's divisible in its single, it's reclusion temporal, for example, the next penalty, the next lower in degree is prison mayor. So how about if it consists of 2 indivisible penalties? So that's 1 divisible, ito naman 2 indivisible penalties. Ano ba yung dalawang indivisible? So death and reclusion perpetua. Sometimes the penalty is reclusion perpetua to death. So 2 indivisible penalties yan. The next lower in degree is not reclusion it's not prison mayor to reclusion temporal class. It's just the next lower in degree. It's just reclusion temporal. So the rule is if the penalty consists of 2 indivisible penalties, the next lower in degree is the immediately preceding or following the lesser of the 2 indivisible penalties, which is reclusion temporal here. And if it's 1 divisible penalty, because it says here in paragraph 2, one or more divisible penalty. So the second situation is one divisible penalty in its full extent, in their full extent. So the full extent of reclusion temporal, then the penalty next lower in degree is just prisión mayor. How about if it's two divisible penalties in their full extent? For example, it's prisión mayor to reclusion temporal. What's the penalty next lower in degree? Nemenyo.
Judge, prison correctional po.
Prisión correctional, because it's just the next following lesser penalty. So if it's two or just one divisible penalty in their full extent, the next lower in degree is just the following penalty. Okay. It's also the same if it's three. So if, for example, the penalty is prisión correctional to reclusión temporal, so prisión correctional, prisión mayor, and reclusión temporal, the next lower in degree is just arresto mayor. The next following degree, following the lesser or the least if there are three penalties. So paragraph 3 provides if there are one or two indivisible penalties and the maximum period of another divisible penalty. So here it's just reclusion perpetua, reclusion temporal, and I'm sorry, it's death, reclusion perpetua, and reclusion temporal maximum. Because two indivisible penalties, death and reclusion perpetua, and the maximum of another divisible penalty. So, yan lang yung situation na yan. So, the penalty now prescribed by law is reclusion temporal maximum to death. What will be the penalty next lower in degree in that scenario? Dumas.
Judge, it would be presión mayor in its maximum and then reclusion temporal in its medium.
Is that N or two?
Two, Judge, two.
Two. So the answer is prisión. The next penalty next lower in degree is prisión mayor in its maximum period. So here it's prisión mayor in its maximum period. To reclusion temporal in its medium period. So it's just the following, the next following penalties in the respective periods. Since there are three here, you just count three downwards. So it's yung susunod na sa reclusion temporal maximum, it's medium, minimum, and then another one because it should be three. So prisión mayor maximum. So that will be the penalty next lower in degree in that case. And how about if when the penalty prescribed is composed of several periods corresponding to different divisible penalties. So magkakaiba siyang kinds ng penalties and different periods also. For example, the penalty prescribed by law is prisión correctional maximum to prisión mayor medium. That will be the penalty for the crime. So we have different periods and different penalties of prisión mayor and prisión correctional. What will be the penalty now next lower in degree? Cañedo.
Judge, it would be prison correctional in its medium and
You have to start with the lowest.
Yes, Judge. It would be arresto mayor in its maximum period up to prison correctional to its medium, Judge.
Yes, correct. So again, just count downwards three 3 penalties downwards, including the period. So the penalty now next lower in degree in that case will be arresto mayor in its maximum period to prisión correccional medium, because the lowest penalty prescribed by law is prisión correccional maximum. So you just count downwards, 3 downwards. So if the penalty prescribed by law class, it does not appear in any of the rules, you just apply the rules in analogy. So for example, if the penalty consists of 2 periods or just 1 period, for example, the penalty prescribed for the crime is just prisión correccional minimum. So prisión correccional minimum in its minimum period. That's the penalty prescribed. What now will be the penalty next lower in degree, Poson?
Judge, it would be arresto mayor in its maximum.
Yes. So it's going to be just the next lower in degree. You just have one penalty in one period. So you just look for the penalty just 1 degree lower. So that will give you arresto mayor in its maximum period. How about if we have two periods? So for example, the penalty prescribed is prisión correccional in its minimum and medium period. So this one. What will be the penalty next lower in degree? Ko.
The next penalty lower is arresto mayor in its medium to arresto mayor in its maximum, Judge.
Yes, so that will be the penalty next lower in degree. So we have, since we have 2 periods of prisión correccional, the penalty next lower in degree should also be 2 downwards. So you count downwards. We have arresto mayor. Now it will give you arresto mayor medium to arresto mayor maximum. So that will be the penalty next lower in degree. What is the significance of this class? Again, when there's a privilege mitigating circumstance, it's lowered by 1 degree. When it's committed by an accomplice, lower by 1 degree. When it's in the frustrated stage, lower by 1 degree. And also, how can you count the imposable penalty for attempted stage and for the accessories if you don't know how to get the penalty next lower in degree? So if you're going to get the second lower in degree penalty, you're just going to follow the same rules. So if you went down 3 penalties downwards for the next lower in degree, then the second lower in degree will also follow 3 penalties downwards. How about class if the penalty prescribed for the crime is death? So let's say it's qualified rape. So in qualified rape class, the penalty provided or prescribed by law is death for qualified rape. So how are you going to compute now the penalty next lower in degree? Shall we count it from death, or we get reclusion perpetua first because of RA 9346, because it prohibits us from imposing the penalty of death. So we start or reckon from reclusion perpetua. So where do we reckon? From death or from reclusion perpetua? What do you think, Robles?
Judge, I think we need to start from reclusion perpetua since the imposition of the death penalty is barred.
Caniedo?
Judge, I think we should reckon from the penalty of death, Judge.
Why?
Because although the imposition of the death penalty is prohibited, uh, the penalty of death is still used in the computation of penalties, Judge.
Actually, class, in People versus Bone, the court said that we should count from reclusion perpetua. However, that ruling will result in certain absurdities. So let me illustrate. So qualified rape is death. Sabi sa People versus Bone, reckon from reclusion perpetua because it's the imposable penalty in lieu of death. So now, you will start now from reclusion perpetua. So, for example, the penalty that we're looking for is one for attempted stage. So you're going to look for the second lower in degree. So what is the next second lower in degree penalty after reclusion perpetua? So it's prisión mayor. So 1, 2. This is for the attempted qualified rape. However, class, the penalty for simple rape is reclusion perpetua. So what will be the penalty now for the attempted stage of simple rape? It's the same. It's still going to be prisión mayor. So now, there's no more difference between the penalties for qualified rape on one hand and the simple rape on the other hand for both attempted stage. So that could not have been the possible intent of the law. So there's this opinion, and I agree with this opinion, that in computing the imposable penalty, we should reckon from the prescribed penalty, from the penalty prescribed by law. So we don't reckon from reclusion perpetua. It's really death. And there's a good reason for that, because qualified rape is more serious than simple rape. That's why it's punishable by death. It's just that, again, I mentioned this before, that we're not really scrapping death from the graduation of penalties. It's still there. It's just that we're prohibited from imposing that penalty. But for the sake of computation, I agree with the opinion that it should be reckoned from death in case of crimes punishable with death, so as to avoid any absurdities or some disparity with other crimes, because it will erase the difference, especially in the gravity of the offense. Okay, and that just take note of that, class, that it's provided in People versus Bone, that you should reckon from reclusion perpetua because of RA 9346. Next, so we have now Article 62. We already discussed that. It's the habitual delinquency and other effects of mitigating and aggravating. So we jump now to Article 63. So Article 63, it's for indivisible penalties. 63 is for indivisible, while 64 is for divisible. Okay, so for Article 63, so paragraph 1 of Article 63, so we're just talking about death again here, death and reclusion perpetua. In paragraph 1 and in paragraphs 1 to 3, actually in the whole provision, I'm sorry. Kahit because of RA 9346, kahit pagbali-balik ta rin mo yan, it's just reclusion perpetua. That's imposable. But for the sake of knowing how to apply the rules, paragraph 1, when there's one aggravating circumstance, the greater penalty shall be applied. So let's just imagine that death is still imposable. Okay? So if there's one aggravating circumstance and there are two indivisible penalties, ito na class yung application of circumstances, modifying circumstances. So what will we impose if there are attending circumstances in the case? So there's one aggravating. The greater penalty of the two indivisible penalties will be imposed. So it's death. Okay? Next. Wala. Neither. No mitigating, no aggravating. You will go to the lower of the penalties, which is reclusion perpetua. And of course, when there is a mitigating circumstance, again, reclusion perpetua. But how about class? More than one mitigating circumstance. So let's say we have 3 mitigating circumstances. Robles.
Judge, when there are 2 or more mitigating circumstances and no aggravating circumstances, the penalty is lowered by 1 degree, and then the remaining mitigating circumstances used to compute the period.
So for example here, it's reclusion perpetua to death. What is the imposable penalty now if there are 2 or 3 mitigating circumstances?
Judge, if there are 2, then it would be reclusion temporal. If there
Do you agree, Nimenyo?
Judge, the penalty cannot be lowered by 1 degree, no matter how many mitigating circumstances are present.
That's correct. Mr. Robles, you're talking about divisible penalties. That's the rule for divisible. We're still in indivisible penalties in Article 63. In indivisible penalties class, no matter how many mitigating circumstances there are, it cannot go lower than the lower indivisible penalty of reclusion perpetua. So kahit gaano pa kadami yan, hindi siya bababa by 1 degree or 2. It's just reclusion perpetua. So by virtue of RA 9346, kahit ano pang meron dyan, it's still a reclusion perpetua. And what kind of mitigating circumstances are we talking about here, Ms. Nemen? You're on mute.
Example are the privilege mitigating circumstances when it is present.
No
Sorry,
class.
that's the exception. Sorry, that's the exception. Oh.
So what are we talking about here? What kind of mitigating circumstances are we talking about? We're talking about ordinary mitigating circumstances that can be offset by aggravating. Because if it's a privilege mitigating circumstance like minority class, you don't have any choice. You will lower it by 1 degree. So in that scenario, the answer of Mr. Robles will be correct. It will become reclusion temporal because you'll have to lower it by 1 degree because it's a privilege mitigating circumstance. The provision here talks about the ordinary mitigating circumstances, the presence of ordinary mitigating circumstances, as well as in paragraph 4. So in paragraph 4, it just talks about offsetting. So may konting math to class ha. So for example, so we have reclusion perpetua to death. Okay. For example, there are 4 aggravating circumstances and 3 mitigating circumstances. So you're just going to subtract. So 4 minus 3. May matitira kang 1 aggravating. So again, when there's the presence of aggravating, no mitigating, the higher of the 2 indivisible death penalty. How about if it's 3-3? So 3 minus 3, 0. So neither lesser penalty of reclusion perpetua. Again, if it's 4 mitigating and 3 aggravating. So for minus 3, 1, you'll have 1 mitigating left, lower invisible penalty of reclusion perpetua. So if the crime is punishable with death, and reclusion perpetua will be imposed because of RA 9346, the court should put in the judgment that the accused doesn't have eligibility for parole. So finds accused guilty of this crime and is sentenced to reclusion perpetua in lieu of death by virtue of RA 9346 without eligibility for parole. So the court shall include that. So we now go to Article 64. Article 64 is the divisible penalties. So divisible penalties, again, class, you can divide them in 3 periods. So prescribed penalty is single divisible penalty. So for example, it's reclusion temporal. When there are neither aggravating, neither mitigating, medium period. That's the imposable penalty. So let me just emphasize, class, or let me just emphasize this so you can take note. When we say prescribed penalty is different from imposable penalty, ha? Prescribed penalty is the one provided by law. Imposable penalty is the one that will be imposed by the court after considering all the circumstances. Anong stage committed? Committed by principal, accomplice, or accessory? Are there any aggravating? Are there any mitigating? Or is there a privilege mitigating? So that's the imposable after computing. But the prescribed penalty is the one provided by law. So in this example, the prescribed penalty is reclusion temporal. So if no mitigating, no aggravating, medium period. So when there's only one mitigating, minimum period. When there is only one aggravating, no mitigating, maximum. Okay, dali, di ba? How about, again, when both are present, offsetting again, class, you're going to minus, you're going to subtract, and then you apply the rules, the previous rules that we learned. So if, for example, 4 aggravating, 3 mitigating, then it will leave you with 1 aggravating. So maximum. 4 mitigating, 4 aggravating, 0, medium. 4 mitigating, 3 aggravating, leaves you with 1 mitigating, minimum period. Okay? Now we go to a scenario where there are 2 or more mitigating but no aggravating. So, what's that again, Mr. Robles? So, for example, the penalty is prescribed by law is reclusion temporal, and then we have 4 mitigating and 1 aggravating. What will be the imposable penalty, Mr. Robles? So
Judge.
again, the prescribed penalty is reclusion temporal. And then there are 4 mitigating and 1 aggravating.
Judge, it would be reclusion temporal in the minimum periods. It can go down by 1 degree since the requirement for that has to be has the crime has to not have an aggravating circumstance.
Again, so the prescribed penalty is reclusion temporal. My
Yes, sir.
question now, in the presence of 4 mitigating and 1 aggravating, what will now be the imposable penalty?
A reclusion temporal in the minimum pa rin, Judge, since we can't lower the penalty by 1 degree since there is an aggravating circumstance present.
Mr. Robles, this is divisible penalty. Yes, this reclusion temporal is divisible. Okay? You may go lower than the penalty because this is divisible and you offset. If there is 1 aggravating, you offset, di ba? So 3 minus 1, 2. Well, I'm sorry, 4. So 4 minus 1, 3. So it gives you 3 mitigating left. What will you do with the mitigating circumstances now?
Then it will be if it will be applied, then the penalty should be prison mayor in the minimum period. Since
Prison mayor in the minimum period. Why did you use minimum?
Since the 2 ordinary mitigating circumstance will lower the degree, lower the degree of the penalty, and then the other mitigating circumstance is used to determine the period, which is minimum.
Okay. So the 2, we have 4 mitigating and 1 aggravating. 4 minus 1, 3 mitigating left. What will you do with the 3 mitigating circumstances? Reclusion temporal will be, you may use 2 of these mitigating to lower the penalty to prison mayor. But in what period? We still have 1 MC here. What will we do with that? Applying the rules or the rule earlier, if there's 1 mitigating and no more aggravating because you already offset it. Minimum period of prison mayor. Okay? So, reclusion temporal, it was lowered to prison mayor, minimum period because there's still 1 mitigating here. You only need 2 mitigating circumstances, class, to lower down the period. Except if it's a privileged mitigating circumstance. In that case, you don't need 2. You just only need 1. It can lower the penalty by 1 degree. Next. You should remember, class, that the change in the degree can only go lower. It can never go higher. So kahit gaano pa kasama, ang dami niya, halos inubos niya lahat ng aggravating circumstances. Hindi yan tataas than the highest penalty provided or prescribed by law. So for example, the prescribed penalty by law is prison correctional maximum. Ang dami, nag-ipon siya ng aggravating circumstances. It can never go higher than prison correctional maximum. It will still be the imposable penalty. Okay? Paragraph 7 talks about the limits of each period. So you're going to have to visit Article 77 to check the periods for each penalty. So for example, the prescribed penalty is reclusion temporal maximum. Okay. So for example, it's our reclusion temporal maximum period. That's the prescribed penalty. Oh, rather it's imposable. Let me correct that. It's imposable pala. So after considering everything, you arrived at the imposable penalty. So after computing, after offsetting, let's say we arrive at the penalty of reclusion temporal in its maximum period. Yan, the imposable penalty. RT, reclusion temporal maximum, is the duration for that. What was the duration for that, Hoson?
The maximum period, Judge, is from 17 years and 4 months and 1 day to 20 years.
Yes, so 17 years and 4 months and 1 day to 20 years. That's the duration of reclusion temporal in maximum period. The court said in Ladines versus People, the court said that the courts shall have discretion on the length, the duration of the penalty. So for example, I will be imposing reclusion temporal maximum. I may impose any length as long as it's within 17 years, 4 months and 1 day to 20 years. But the court in Ladines said that the default is actually the lower limit. It's 17 years, 4 months and 1 day. If the court will impose 20 years, the court has to justify. So ang default is 17 years, 4 months and 1 day. The lower limit of the duration. If the court wishes to impose 20 years, the court now must justify. Okay? So we go now to Article 65. Article 65 will require you to really compute. Okay? Okay. So I want you to refer to your table. But class, let me just remind you that this may be asked in the exam or in law school or in the bar exams. For that purpose, I want you to really memorize the periods. And then you can forget it afterwards. Then you can just refer to your codal. But for the purpose of your law school and your bar exams, please, because it might be asked. Okay? Tas wala, nangangapa kayo, wala kayong idea. Okay? So Article 65 is about cases that are not composed, the penalty for which is not composed of 3 periods. So anong gagawin natin sa ganyan? So there are rules here. So first class, the first rule is determine the lower limit and upper limit of the prescribed penalty. Then next, determine the duration of the prescribed penalty. Next, divide the entire duration into 3 equal parts. Okay? Then determine the limits of each period. Okay? Kasi hindi siya ang nakalagay lang kasi sa Article 77. It's specific for each penalty and each period for each penalty. Paano kung dalawang penalties of different periods ang prescribed by the law? How will you compute now the 3 periods of those penalties? So let me illustrate. So for example, class, the prescribed penalty is prison mayor minimum to prison mayor medium. Okay. So it's going to be PM. So I'm just going to use PM, prison mayor medium, and prison mayor medium. So that's the penalty prescribed by law. Prison mayor minimum to prison mayor medium. The first rule, what's the first rule? Determine the lower limit and the upper limit. When we say the lower limit, upper limit, you determine the duration, number of years. So what is the lower limit? For prison mayor minimum, Miss Ko, what is prison mayor minimum?
Prison mayor minimum is 6 years and 1 day to 8 years, Judge.
Okay. But we're going to use only the lowest of the duration. So it's going to be 6 years and 1 day. So prison mayor minimum class is 6 years and 1 day to 8 years. But we're just going to use 6 years and 1 day. How about prison mayor medium, Miss Ko?
Prison mayor medium is 8 years and 1 day up to 10 years, Judge.
So what are we going to use there?
8 years and 1 day for the minimum.
We're just going to use 10 years because we're looking for the lower limit and the upper limit. When we say lower limit class and the upper limit, the lowest of the lower penalty and the highest of the higher penalty. So prison mayor medium is 8 years and 1 day to 10 years. We're just going to use 10 years. That's the upper limit. The lower limit is 6 years and 1 day, coming from the duration of prison mayor minimum, 6 years and 1 day to 8 years. That's for just the purpose of computation. Okay, so next, determine the duration of the prescribed penalty. When we say duration, you're going to subtract the higher limit, subtract the lower limit from the higher limit. For the purpose of computation, disregard one thing. So 10 years minus 6 years, we have 4 years. Okay, so that's the duration of the penalty. Now, divide the entire duration into 3 equal portions. Since 4 is not divisible by 3, we're going to have to convert it to months. So how many months is 4 years, Mr. Canedo?
$48, Judge. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay. So you just have to multiply 4 times 12. So we have 48 months. 48 months. Okay? That 48 figure, yan ang i-divide natin ngayon by 3. So, divided by 48 divided by 3 is 16 months. So when we say 16 months, we can also convert it to 1 year and 4 months. Okay? 1 year and 4 months. Anong gagawin natin dyan sa 1 year and 4 months? We'll use that figure to determine the limits of each period. Kasi, di ba, the goal is to determine the 3 periods of prison mayor minimum to prison mayor medium. I-divide natin yung dalawang penalties na yan into 3 periods, minimum, medium, and maximum. So, how do we do that? So, to determine the limits, we should add 1 year, this one, and 4 months to the lower limit to start, okay? To determine the minimum period. So what is the lower limit again? 6 years and 1 day. 6 years and 1 day. But again, for the purpose of computation, disregard 1 day, you just add 1 year and 4 months to 6 years. So 6 years plus 1 year, 4 months. So we have 7 years, 4 months. The minimum period now, class, will become 6 years. And we now include again 1 day because it's actually the prescribed penalty or the duration under the law, 6 years and 1 day to this one, 7 years, 4 months. That's the minimum period. Do you get it so far? Medium. For the medium period, so we'll start with this one. 7 years, 4 months. Again, add 1 year, 4 months. 1 year, 4 months. We have now 8 years and 8 months. So what will be now the duration of your medium period? You start with 7 years here, 7 years, 4 months, and 1 day. Because yung minimum nyo is hanggang 4 months na eh. The next period, the medium period, will begin with 7 years, 4 months, 1 day to 8 years, 8 months. Okay, class? That's your medium period. So 7 years, 4 months, and 1 day to 8 years and 8 months. And now, last, maximum. Sorry, maliit lang yung whiteboard ko. We'll start with 8 years and 8 months because we stopped there. So 8 years, 8 months, plus 1 year, 4 months. 9 years and what's this? 12 months. 12 months is also 1 year class. So this is actually 10 years. And this is that, the upper limit. So we're on the right track. So, but we have to get the period of the maximum, the duration of the maximum period. What's the maximum period? What's the maximum period now? What's the duration? It's 8 years, 8 months, and 1 day to 10 years. Okay? Do you get it so far, class? So again, just a recap. For example, you're faced with 2 periods or 2 penalties, different periods. You need to determine you need to divide it into 3. So determine the lower limit and the upper limit. Here, the lower limit is the lower part of the duration of prison mayor minimum, which is 6 years and 1 day. And then the higher limit is the upper limit rather is the higher part of the duration of the higher penalty, which is 10 years. And then determine the duration. How do you determine the duration? You just subtract. So you get 4. And then divide the entire duration into 3. So convert it, if it's not divisible by 3, you just convert it into months. You have 16 months, and then you again convert it into mixed year and month. So 1 year and 4 months. And then now you determine the limits of each period by adding the duration 1 year, 4 months to starting with the 6 years, which is the lower limit. And then you go, you proceed from that. So 6 years, 1 year, 4 months, 7 years and 4 months. And then you end here. You include 1 day, already has a duration. You're just scrapping the 1 day, you're just removing the 1 day for the purpose of computation. Dahil parang ano siya, kasama naman na talaga siya doon, parang pampagulo lang. Pero sa duration, you have to include it. 6 years and 1 day to 7 years and 4 months. And for the medium, You have to start with 7 years, 4 months, and 1 day sa duration, but in computation, wala. To 8 years and 8 months. Okay? So let's have another example so you can can I erase now? Okay. So for example, the penalty is only composed of one period. So we have version mayor maximum. EMAX. What is the, so again, determine the lower limit and the upper limit. So what's the lower limit of prison mayor maximum? Panyego.
Prison mayor judge, that would be from 6 years and 1 day to 12 years.
6 years maximum.
In its maximum period, judge, it would be 10 years and 1 day to 12 years.
So what is the lower limit? So that's the first, that's the first step. Determine the lower and the upper limits.
Judge, it would be 10 years, judge, and 1 day to 12 years, judge.
So the lower limit class is 10 years, 1 day.
Yes, judge.
And then the upper limit is just 12 years. So that's the higher part of the duration. Since we only have one penalty, one period, just utilize the duration for that penalty. So 10 years and 1 day is the lower limit. 12 years is the upper limit. So here, the next the next step is determine the duration. So 12 minus 10, 2. That's the duration. And then divide it by 3. Convert it to months. So 2 years, 24 months. Divided by 3. We have 8 months. So you will add it. Okay, so for the minimum, you will add 8 months to 10 years and 1 day. But again, for purpose of computation, don't include 1 day. 10 years and 8 months is the minimum period. Then the duration will be 10 years and 1 day, because that's already the duration. Again, you include it. 10 years and 1 day to 10 years, 8 months after adding. Medium is what? 10 years, 8 months, 1 day, 2. You add 8 months to 10 years and 8 months. What's that? 10 years and 8 months plus 8 months is actually 10 years and 16 months. And 16 months class is 1 year and 4 months. So what will be the sum after? 10 years and 16 months is also 11 years and 4 months. So 10 years, 8 months, 1 day to 11 years, 4 months. And then finally, the maximum period is 11 years, 4 months, 1 day to 12 years. You want to check if you're doing it correctly? You may cross-check by adding 8 months to 11 years and 4 months. So what will you get? 11 years, 4 months plus 8 months is actually 11 years, 12 months. So 12 months is 1 year, 12 years. So if you get the same figure doon sa upper limit, and when you add the duration that you got, then you know that you're doing it correctly. Okay? So, I'll erase na. So far ba class? Kaya pa? As you can still follow? Okay, so we're now going to Islaw. So it's related. Actually, I think you'll discuss it in your special penal laws. But just to give you an idea, para hindi kayo nangangapa, so it won't be your first time encounter this. We'll just discuss it briefly. So the application of the Islaw is the law, if it's more than 1 year, the penalty is more than 1 year, the law requires the courts to impose an indefinite sentence. It's an Islaw, it means indeterminate sentence law. Others pronounce it Islaw, but I prefer Islaw. So the courts should provide a range. So ang essence niyan, class, is you should always have a minimum term and a maximum term. Okay? So it applies both to violations of special penal laws and crimes under RPC. So this is governed by Act 4103. So you refer to that law, class. Act 4103. So the Islaw is not applicable in every case. So there are exceptions. So I mentioned one already. If the penalty does not exceed 1 year, this is not applicable. Offenses punishable by death or life imprisonment and reclusion perpetua, it does not apply. Those convicted with treason does not apply. So to give you to help you remember easily, there are 3 classifications of cases wherein Islaw will not apply. So it's according to penalty, according to crime, according to offender. So according to penalty, when it's penalty when it does not involve imprisonment, it does not apply. So destierro is one. Reclusion perpetua or death and life imprisonment, no, indeterminate sentence law. Also, if the imprisonment does not exceed 1 year. According to crime, if the crime committed or the person is convicted of offenses of treason, conspiracy, and proposal to commit treason, misprision of treason, rebellion, sedition, or espionage. Okay? And piracy, also of piracy. And lastly, according to offender, what kind of offenders are not entitled to Islaw? Habitual delinquents. Offenders who evaded terms of sentence. Escape from confinement. Violated condition of pardon. Those who have been granted conditional pardon and violated the terms of that pardon. So, Islaw will not apply with regard to them. Okay. So, for the purpose of computing in violation of special laws, mas madali yung special laws. So, sa special laws, you're just going to get the minimum and the maximum. Minimum term, maximum term. And it shall not go beyond the lower range and the maximum range. Let us illustrate that. So if it's a violation of a special law, for example, you know, in special laws class, they seldom use the penalties used in the RPC. Usually it just provides for number of years. So for example, the special penal law provides for the penalty of 2 years to 4 years imprisonment. Sabi ng Islaw, you will just get the minimum term from the 2 years and the maximum term 4 years. And it should not go lower than the lowest duration and not higher, not more than the 4 years. So ganyan lang siya sa special law. So the minimum term is 2 years, maximum is 4 years. So what can you do with that? You may impose 3 to 4 years. Okay, pasok. 2 years and 8 months to 3 years and 6 months. Pasok. How about 1 year and 8 months to 4 years? Hindi na pwede because you went beyond or went lower than the 2 years. So the only limitation or the only thing to remember is that it shouldn't be lower, it shouldn't go lower than the 2 years, and it should not go higher than the maximum, which is 4 years. That's for violation of special penal laws. But for RPC, since we have the periods and everything, medyo mas komplikado siya. But of course, you can do that. Easy yan sa inyo. Okay? So, you're going to get the minimum and the maximum. Okay. So, for example, the penalty prescribed by law is reclusion temporal. Reclusion temporal, as you've learned class, it's a divisible penalty. So, you divide the penalty into 3 periods. Max, medium, minimum. Okay? Then you get the next lower in degree. That's why it's important to learn to remember the rules in choosing the next lower in degree class. What is the next lower in degree here? Dumas.
Judge, it is prison mayor.
Prison mayor. So prison mayor is the next lower in degree. Okay. And then determine if there are attending circumstances. So let's say neither mitigating nor aggravating circumstances are present. So what is the imposable period here in reclusion temporal? Medium. You're going to appreciate the attending circumstances for the purpose of the maximum term. And then after determining the proper period, this is it. So this will be your range. So this is the minimum term, the penalty next lower in degree than that prescribed by law. And then the maximum is reclusion temporal medium. So it should not get higher than RT medium. So we have to look again at the duration. So what is the duration again? What is prison mayor? Prison mayor is 6 years and 1 day. So for example, the duration of prison mayor class is 6 years and 1 day to 12 years. 6 years, 1 day to 12 years. RT medium is 14 years. 14 years, 8 months, 1 day, to 17 years, 4 months. Yan. So it should be within that range. So if the court, an example of a valid imposition of an indeterminate sentence within this range is if the court will impose 6 years, 1 day as minimum, to 14 years, 8 months, 1 day as maximum. Basta within the range. And it depends on the circumstances. It might get complicated. And again, class, just to again reiterate, if there's a privilege mitigating circumstance, paano nyo gagawin yung privilege mitigating circumstance? Lower RT to after appreciate privilege mitigating circumstance of, for example, minority, lower it to prison mayor, and then you consider this as maximum, and then the minimum would be prison correctional. Or lower as is RT, lower minimum term is prison mayor, and then prison correctional would be the minimum term. Let me do that. So for example, RT, reclusion temporal. If there's a privilege mitigating circumstance, do you apply the privilege mitigating circumstance in from the prescribed penalty or from the imposable penalty? Class. Poson.
You apply it, judge, in the prescribed penalty.
So you reckon it from the prescribed penalty, not from, so for example, RT prescribed, privilege mitigating circumstance is prison mayor. So this is the maximum term, and then the minimum term is prison correctional. Some would say that the privilege mitigating circumstance must be reckoned from like this. So RT max, and then privilege mitigating is the minimum, and then apply privilege mitigating circumstance after already determining the medium period. For example, no aggravating, no mitigating circumstance, so medium. So from RT medium daw, you will determine the you will get the maximum. So RT medium, so prison mayor medium. So they're saying, some people would say na pagka may privilege mitigating circumstance, magulo daw. Magulo because it will result into, sometimes it would result to, or it would result in instances wherein the maximum term daw is mas mababa pa sa minimum term. But the problem with that is you don't reckon the privilege mitigating circumstance from after determining the aggravating or the ordinary circumstances. You reckon it from the prescribed penalty by law. Yung raw, the raw penalty. You will apply it to that before you apply the ordinary and aggravating mitigating circumstances. So, privilege muna. So, you have to lower it by 1 degree. Because if it's here, so no, let's say, ito yung sinasabi nila. So, for example, RT one mitigating, no aggravating, so RT minimum, then PM in its entirety to. Okay? So, if you're going to lower this by 1 degree, sinasabi nila the maximum term now will be prison mayor minimum. So, ang magiging itsura niyan is max prison mayor minimum. Minimum is prison mayor. Magulo nga naman talaga. So, to avoid that, you have to do it properly. You have to determine the penalty if there's a privilege mitigating circumstance. You determine it and use the raw prescribed penalty by law as the reckoning point before you apply the other mitigating or aggravating circumstances. So that's it, class. You will learn more about that in your special penal laws. Okay, so now we go to successive service of sentences, Article 70. So ito na yung threefold rule. This is what we're talking about. This is a threefold rule. So this article, it provides for the limitation in the service of sentence class. This is not with regard to imposition. So the court can impose as many counts of, for example, arresto menor. So for example, sabi sa Article 70, if the accused can serve the sentences simultaneously. So for example, imprisonment and fine. So pwede namang sabay yun. So habang nasa kulungan ka, magbayad ka ng fine mo. However, if it's not possible, then successive. Paano mangyayari yun? So you will serve first the more serious of the penalties and then pababa. So essentially, in essence, if you've already served the more serious, covered na niya yung less serious penalties because you've already stayed there also. Necessarily covered na yung period of the lesser penalties. So let me give you an example. But the restriction here, class, is that it should not be more than 3 times the most serious penalty, and it shall in no case exceed 40 years. So for example, class, si offender, sobrang nakakainis siya. He or she was convicted for 11 counts of unjust vexation. So the court imposed 11 days of arresto menor for each count. So 11 times 11 yan. What is 11 times 11? Robles.
Judge, 100 21.
So 121 days. Pero ang sabi ng provision, Article 70, it shall in no case be more than 3 times the most serious penalty. Lahat sila 11 days. So 11 is also the most serious. So it should not exceed 33 days, class. Gets nyo? That's the cap. So again, it's in the service of sentence. It's not in the imposition by the courts. So the court can impose that. 121 days. 11 counts ka ng 11 days of arresto minor. But in the service of sentence, the offender will only serve max 33 days. Okay? So, for example, sobrang haba, aabot na ng more than 45 years. Wala na yung 5 years because also it shall not be more than 40 years. It can never exceed 40 years. So, for example, kahit na yung 45 years, it's not, it's still less than 3 times the maximum penalty, but it already exceeded 40 years. So, hindi pa rin pwede. So, must not exceed 3 times the most serious penalty and also not more than 40 years. Okay, that's the limitation. So, we go to Article 89 class. So Article 89, so Article 89 class, it's the extinguishment of criminal liability. What are the ways to extinguish criminal liability? Also,
Criminal liability is extinguished by the death of the offender. It is also extinguished by the service of the sentence, by amnesty, by absolute pardon, by prescription of the crime, prescription of penalty, and for the case in Article 344, by marriage of the offended party.
okay. So there is also this service of sentence class that you may not serve inside in the prison. So we have probation, and we also have community service. Community service is under RA 13362, Community Service Act. It only applies when the penalty imposed are arresto menor and arresto mayor. So instead of serving it in prison, the offender will now serve the community through tree planting activities, clean up drives, ganyan. So it's similar to probation. It's just that for community service, it's a lighter penalty. So it also follows that the crime committed is also of a lighter nature. And also you must take note, class, that arresto menor and arresto mayor, arresto menor, for example, is the duration for arresto menor is 1 to 30 days. How about if it's a violation of a special law? So for example, 1 month. Yung violation ng RA 11332, yung nahuli ka sa labas na walang mask, it's punishable by 1 month. The lightest of the penalties is 1 month imprisonment. Can you avail of Community Service Act? So instead of being imprisoned, you may just serve the community. Cool.
Yes, Judge.
Actually, no. Because the Community Service Act only provides for arresto menor and arresto mayor. And these are penalties that are provided by the revised penal code. And unless the violation of the special law also uses the same penalties, even though it is equal to 1 month, it will not apply to that violation because it's specific there. It's for arresto menor and arresto mayor only. But the offender may apply for probation. So that's the remedy if the offender is not disqualified. Okay? So who are so we go now to probation. So probation class is covered by amended by RA 10707. May amendment na yan. It is to there are purposes for the application of probation, but mainly it's for the best interest of the offender, such that the best interest of the offender would be served if the sentence is served elsewhere, not inside prison, together with the hardened criminals. Kasi usually, sa prison, yung mga hardened criminals dyan, may influensyahan pa instead of pwede silang ma-rehabilitate or ma-reform elsewhere, community-based penalties or programs, instead na ma-reform, lumalala because tumatagal sila sa preso kasama ng mga totoong hardened criminals. That's why probation is only available to crimes punishable by not more than 6 years. So if it's more than 6 years, it's no longer probationable. Because again, there's the presumption that if it's punishable by more than 6 years, it's already a serious crime. It's already of a serious nature. So what else? Who else are not entitled to probation? So convicted of violation of a crime against national security, convicted by final judgment of an offense by imprisonment of more than 6 months and 1 day, who have been once on probation, and who are already serving sentence at the time of the enactment of the probation law. So what are the requisites? The requisites class for probation is that there must be a post-service investigation report by the probation officer and a determination by the court itself that the ends of justice and the best interest of the public and that of the offender would be best served by putting the offender on probation. So I have a question, class. So the requisites, post-service investigation report and determination that the best interest would be served by the court. So my question is, Cañedo.
Yes, Judge.
My question now, how about if the probation officer, so nagbigay ng post-investigation report, post-sentence investigation report, nakalagay dun for denial. For denial. Sabi ng probation officer, we recommend that this probation application be denied. My question now is the court bound by that recommendation such that the court should also deny the application?
Judge, the probation is not a vested right of criminal offenders. It is a privilege granted by the court, so the court um, has the decision whether or not to apply
Yes.
probation to the
Yes, but my question, Mr. Canedo, is, kunwari, ikaw yung judge, tapos bumalik sa'yo yung investigation report, ang nakalagay dun for denial. But you really want to grant the application for probation because you think the best interest of the offender would be served by putting the offender on probation. Can you do that despite the recommendation of denial?
Judge, the answer would still be no, Judge.
What's your answer? No.
Yes, Judge.
So you will abide by the recommendation of the probation officer.
Yes, Judge.
Ko. Same question.
Yes, Judge.
So susunod ka rin dun sa recommendation ng probation officer.
Yes, Judge, because
How about you? Oh, yes, why? Why what was the reason?
because we are bound to follow the orders of the court.
No, probation officer yun Ikaw yung judge. Because the one who conducts the investigation on the application for probation is the probation officer. Hindi yan court. Then babalik yung investigation report sa court. Then the court will review the report. And then the final order will come from the court to deny or approve the probation.
Can I change my answer, Judge?
So what's your answer?
We can the court is not bound to follow the recommendation of the probation officer.
Why?
Because the court has the judicial power.
Actually, Ms. Ko, that's correct. So the court is not bound by the recommendation, by the name itself. It's just a recommendation. So it's recommendatory in nature only. So the court may either adopt the recommendation or come up with a different order altogether. Actually, that happened recently to me. The probation officer recommended for the denial of the application for probation of one of the offenders before the court. Nakalagay doon, they're recommending the denial because he's considered as an absconding criminal. When you say absconding criminal, hindi nag-appear for interview at all, for initial interview. Hindi daw nag-appear. So they considered him as not interested in pursuing his application. Ngayon, yung PAW nag-oppose dun sa recommendation because ang nilagay dun sa recommendation, hindi daw nila mahanap dun sa barangay address, hindi daw nila mahanap sa detention, pagkatapos hindi daw nag-report for initial interview. Ngayon, upon review of the records, hindi hindi talaga mahahanap sa barangay address yun dahil nakakulong. Talagang hindi nila makikita yun doon. Ngayon, sinabi nila, hinanap daw nila sa detention, hindi naman sila kumuha ng proof ng certification of detention saying na no, so and so is detained here. However, on the other hand, yung PAO nakakuha ng certificate of detention proving that the offender is detained in the detention facility. And then, they also said that hindi daw nag-report for initial interview. But then, meron silang letter for extension of submitting the report. Nakalagay doon na ang hinihintay na lang daw nila is NBI clearances. Pero nag-report daw yung offender. So, ang daming disparity. Nakakainis. So, I put there in the order na actually, if you read the law, it says there that mandatory, the post-sentence investigation report is indeed mandatory. So, hindi ka pwedeng mag-issue ng probation order without that report. But it doesn't say favorable. It doesn't say that. So, any report. So, upon review of the court, tapos sabi ng court, upon determination, the best interest of the offender would be served actually. Oh, the court can still do that and do away with the recommendation. So they cannot complain. And then the court is not done. In the same way, if ang recommendation ng probation officer is for approval, pero tingin ng court, naku, pa-deny ito. The court can also do that. The court can deny, although there was a favorable recommendation. So it's the report is just recommendatory in nature. It's still it will still depend on the sound discretion of the court. So class, probation is not applicable if the offender has perfected an appeal. Huh? So if it's either appeal ka or accept the conviction and then apply for probation. Hindi ka pwedeng nag-appeal tapos mag-apply ka for probation. Hindi pwedeng ganun yun. So, applicable dyan yung saying na you cannot have your cake and eat it too. Okay? So, hindi ka pwedeng, you cannot enjoy both worlds. Pag mag-appeal ka, you're already abandoning your option of probation. If you're going for probation, you're already accepting the finality of your conviction. How about class? If, for example, the trial court convicted the accused of a non-probationable offense. So, more than 6 years. More than 6 years yung penalty. And then, nag-appeal si accused. Upon appeal, sabi ng CA, at the end, dapat ito lang dapat yung crime niyan. And then, the penalty now is less than 6 years, thus probationable. Can the offender still apply for probation or no more because the offender already applied for appeal, filed an appeal? Poson.
A judge in that case, since it's the lower court who erred in their decision, since they applied a non-probationable penalty, it is not the fault of the offender if he was not able to file a petition for probation at the outset. So that's the exception in that case, because when the appeal resulted to a lowering of non-probationable penalty to a probationable one, then the offender is allowed to apply for a probation.
Yes. So the offender now will be able to apply for probation based on the modified decision, imposing a probationable penalty. So using that modified decision, the offender can now apply for probation. And a probation class is also applicable even if the penalty is a fine. Hindi lang siya limited to imprisonment. It may also be applied if the penalty is a fine. So, Section 14, period of probation. So, sa probation law. Section 14 provides for the period. Okay, so if the period of imprisonment is not more than 1 year, the period of probation shall not exceed 2 years. And in all other cases, not exceed 6 years. Not more than 6 years. So if the term of imprisonment imposed by the court is not more than 1 year, probation period shall not be more than 2 years, and the rest not more than 6 years. And if the imposable penalty is a fine, and the offender is made to serve subsidiary imprisonment because of insolvency. So we already studied this. You already learned this. The period of probation shall not be less than nor be more than twice the total number of days of subsidiary imprisonment. Okay, so again, 537 ang rate class ng highest minimum wage per day in the Philippines right now. So for example, 10,000 pesos ang fine. So divided by 537. So 18 days. 18 days. 18.6, but again, disregard the decimal point. 18 days. Sabi sa law, the period of probation shall not be less than, shall not be less than 18 days, but also not be more than twice 18 days. So it cannot be more than 36. So it cannot be for 37 days. The probation cannot be for 37 days. Okay. And then prescription of crimes. Prescription of crimes class is provided in Article 90. It's different from prescription of penalties. Prescription of crimes, it's Article 90. Prescription of penalties is Article 92. Prescription of crimes, it's for the institution of the action. Prescription of penalties, it's already a service of the penalty. So, marami akong nadidismiss na kaso because prescribed na yung crime. It depends on Article 90. And also, you may want to check Act 3326. Act 3326 class provides for the prescription of special penal laws and ordinances. Okay, so it says Act 3326 Section 1, it provides for 2 months for violation of ordinances, 1 year if the penalty is a fine or imprisonment of not more than 1 month, and then 4 years if more than 1 month but less than 2 years. 2 years but not 2 years but less than 6 years, 8 years prescription. 12 years for 6 years and above imprisonment. And then if the crime is treason, 20 years. Okay, so if it's the RPC, prescription of crimes is governed by Article 90. And kailan nagsastart ang running of the prescription period? From the discovery of the offense. Discovery of the offense by the offended party, by the authorities or their agents. And shall be interrupted. You will learn this in your Crime Pro. Interrupt the running of the prescriptive period shall be interrupted by the filing of a complaint or an information. It depends on the crime. How about prescription of penalties? So, tapos na yung trial. Nag-impose na ng penalty ang judge. Service na. Okay? So, this will happen if the offender escapes prison or escapes, for example, on bail, tapos convicted, tapos nag-issue na ng warrant of arrest, you have to serve your sentence. Umalis, tumakas, okay? The penalty, the service now, the penalty, the prescriptive period for penalty will now run. Okay? So it will run from the date kanina, prescription of crimes, it will start to run from the discovery of the offense. Here, sa prescription of penalties, it will start from the evasion, the time the offender evaded sentence. And it will be told or interrupted, not by the filing of a complaint or information, dahil tapos na, but by voluntary surrender, by apprehension, if the offender commits yet another crime, told yan. And if the offender goes to a country where the Philippines maintains no extradition treaty. Kasi unfair nga naman, 'di ba? Na nakapunta siya doon, there's no way to get him back. Told ang prescription mo ngayon. Hindi ka magpe-prescribe. You know, class, yung prescription kasi, it's there to afford opportunity or somehow reward the offender, kasi you have to, parang some sort of, hindi talaga, pero some sort of, I think of it as some sort of reward, kasi ang galing mo. Nakatakas ka, biruin mo yun, no? For example, for prescription of crimes, meron ka ng standing warrant of arrest, pero grabe, hindi ka talaga nahuhuli. Diba? From discovery of the offense, hindi ka talaga mahuli-huli. Parang ano talaga, sobrang galing. Doon naman sa service of sentence, service of penalty, nakatakas ka. Tapos, hindi ka nahuhuli din. Tapos, pumunta ka sa isang country na may extradition treaty, hindi ka pa rin nahuhuli. So, parang, sige na nga, yan na yung reward mo. Dahil naka-prescribe na, sige na, absolto ka na. Yan. I think of it that way. Partial extinction, Article 94. So, partial extinction, we have conditional pardon, commutation of sentence, and good conduct allowances. So, what is the difference, class, between commutation of sentence and conditional pardon? So, commutation of sentence is granted by the president, and it converts the imprisonment into another period. So it substitutes the original penalty. The president substitutes the original penalty. Also parole. What is parole? Nemenyo.
Judge, parole is the suspension of the sentence of a convict after serving the minimum of the indeterminate sentence.
What is the difference between parole and conditional pardon?
For parole, it may be given after the prisoner has served the minimum
Who
minimum
gives
sentence.
parole? The parole board, not the president. But the president grants conditional pardon. So, the parole board grants parole. Conditional pardon is granted by the president. So, Also, if you violate the terms of a conditional pardon, you may be liable for evasion of sentence under Article 159. There's no such, there's no similar, or it's not the same with violation of parole. In parole, you're just going to be rearrested to serve the remaining balance of the penalty. The penalty suspended. So it's kind of similar with probation. You know, class, when you're on probation, so when the court grants the probation application of the offender, yung terms niya halos pareho din ng community service. So community-based din siya. Tree planting, cleanup drives, and then merong mga certain terms lang na you cannot change your address. If you're going to change your employment, you have to report to the probation officer. You have to initially report from receipt of the issuance of the probation order. You have to report within 3 days or 72 hours to the probation officer. So you're going to report, there's a minimum reporting per month. So it's usually twice a month for the whole duration of the probation period. If the offender violates, so for example, hindi nag-report for initial reporting offender within 3 days or 72 hours, the court may issue a warrant of arrest to summon the accused and ask him or her to explain, but di ka nag-report. And if the court finds that it's unjustified, cancel probation, you serve the remaining balance of your sentence. Doon ka sa loob ng preso. Okay? Time allowances. I don't know if you've heard, but I think it's just today. Judge Gito, co-faculty, he's also a co-faculty in UST Law. He invalidated a provision saying that the good time allowance will not be applicable if the offender committed a heinous crime. So Judge Gito said that's invalid. That's an invalid rule. So what he's saying is that, I haven't read the entire decision, but the gist is even the commission of heinous crimes would be covered by the application of good time allowance. Good time allowance, class, is good conduct allowance is when the offender has served time in prison, and then the Bureau of Corrections or the BJMP will determine if the offender is eligible for deductions. Okay, so kung nagpakabait ka doon, hindi ka nakikisama sa riot, you're actually helping in assisting inside. So meron yan, good conduct time allowance. That may be deducted from the totality of your sentence. Okay, so hintayin natin. Malamang iaakyat yan sa SC. And then, konti na lang class, bear with me. So, Article 100, it's, you should, maikli lang tong provision to class. Civil liability, every person criminally liable is also civilly liable. So if you're criminally liable, automatic yan, may civil liability ka din. Of course, there are certain exceptions that we've already discussed before. So meron pa nga yan, biro class, pag naging 4th year na kayo. Yung mga 4th year kasi, meron yan criminal law review and civil law review. Nung panahon namin, parehong terror yung review subjects for crim and civil. Minsan, hindi gumagraduate on time yung 4th year student dahil parehong bagsak sa crim and civil law review. So may biruan yan. every person criminally liable is also civilly liable. So, pareho kang bagsak. Actually, they already passed away. May they rest in peace. Pero grabe class, naabutan ko yung pareho. And ang lala. Talagang mga ngatog ka, yung pawis mo, talagang butil-butil na malamig. Ganyan. Nakakatakot. So, kinakatakutan talaga sila ng fourth year. Pero mag-graduate ka na lang, review subjects na lang to, hindi ka pa makagraduate because wala silang pakialam kung graduating ka, hindi ka nila palulusutin because if they think that you will not make it in the bar exams, might as well fail you here in law school. Kesa just give you false hopes na, sige, kaya mo, papasa na lang kita, sige. Pero alam nila na hindi ka talaga papasa, that you will not make it. Babagsak ka talaga. And then, si Dean Ortega, I don't know if you're familiar with Dean Ortega, negative ang mga grades. Negative class. As in negative 10, negative 15, ganyan. Parang winter. Tapos, meron pang annotations yan na you will not become a lawyer, ganyan. May mga annotations siyang ganon. So, pagka wala kang ganong annotations or nakakuha ka ng mga 20, hindi negative positive 20, parang masaya ka na nun. Pero totoo, hindi ka dapat masaya dun kasi 20 out of 100 ka. Pero hindi, pag sa kanya, 20 out of 100 masaya ka na dun kasi hindi ka nag-negative. Tapos may revalida pa class, yung oral exams sa fourth year. Kahit babae, hindi siya nagpapatawad as in mumurahin kanya ng Tagalog. So, thank God, hindi naman niya ako na ganun. So, ano lang, swertehan lang din talaga. Sayang eh. Sayang, wala na siya. Mas fun sana yun. Okay, civil liability. What are the civil liabilities? What is included in civil liabilities? Dumas.
Judge, fine. And
Fine. Mr. Dumas is not a civil liability.
restitution, Judge. Restitution, reparation, and indemnification.
So we have restitution, reparation, and indemnification. Restitution class is when you return. The offender is required to return the same object taken. If restitution, if return is not possible, reparation. So palitan mo yung amount nung kunwari crime of theft, ninakaw yung Hermes Birkin. Balik mo yan, restitution. Ngayon, binenta na pala, nabenta na, hindi na malukit. Malis na, nagpunta na ng abroad yung binentahan. Restitution ka ngayon. Kung magkano yung value, nung estimated value, or meron kang receipt, pakita ng complainant, bayaran mo yan. Restitution. Indemnification is also for consequential damages. Indemnification class, I want you to go to Hugueta, People versus Hugueta. The court provided there an exhaustive table for the damages for each crime. So in the future, pwede niyong magamit yun for reference. It's the Hugueta table. So it provides there the moral damages in case there's death, the civil indemnity, exemplary damages, temperate damages. You'll learn more about the kinds of damages when you reach torts. Okay, exemplary damages class is granted when it's to serve an example, deterrent to the public. So para wag niyong tularan yan, impose tayo exemplary damages. Civil indemnity is there's a fixed amount for death. in case of homicide, murder. Actual damages class is the damages collected that are supported by receipts. So may resibo yan. Okay, po-provide mo. Moral damages, nasa hugweta rin yan. So there's, it increases over time. So currently, yun ang sinusundan natin, moral damages is for the sleepless night, besmirched reputation, moral anxiety, mental anguish, temperate damages class may be awarded in lieu of actual damages. So for example, yung actual damages mo hindi umabot ng hindi yung actual damages hindi supported by receipts. Sabi mo, 30,000 po talaga yung na-incur namin sa pagpapalibing, sa pagpapalagay ng pagpapaburol, pagpapa-hospital before namatay. Pero wala kang na-present ng resibo doon siguro sa kapilorihan mo na misplaced or whatever. So, 30,000 not supported by receipts. The court may actually grant temperate damages in the amount of 50,000 in lieu of actual damages not supported. So, iniisip ko nga nun, if you're a victim, tapos feeling mo hindi siya abot ng 50,000, huwag ka na lang mag-present ng resibo para yung court pwedeng parang may sure ball ka na 50,000 na temperate damages kung mag-award yung court. But the court may do that, the temperate damages in lieu of actual damages not proved. Okay? So indemnification, loss of income, loss of earning capacity, may computation din yan when you get to torts. So meron yan yung yung lifespan of an adult, tapos some computation pa rin. So what else? So that's it. You may just read the other provisions, but we basically discussed all the important ones. Okay, so we end our Criminal Law 1 class, and the coverage of the final exams will be from start to finish. Because you need everything. It's going to be an application of everything. Hindi siya yung parang paisa-isa. Okay? So, you have to apply all the things that you've learned, if any. Okay? So, do we have a tentative schedule for our prelims, Ms. Montalvo?
Yes, Judge. Let me just open it.
Okay.
For Crim, Judge, it's on January 5.
January 5. And it's final starts on January 3.
Yes, Judge.
So there. Just a favor class pala, no? I realized, mas madali kung PDF file yung isend nyo. Grabe, ang hirap nung, nung JPEG. Grabe, inisa-isa ko siya. Because, di ba, hindi siya kasya sa isang photo, of course. So, hinanap ko yung image name. So, isa-search ko pa, tapos isa-isahin ko pa, save image. Tapos, basta nakakahilo siya. So, I need to request you to please just save it as PDF file. And then, name your file with your surnames. Okay? Surnames na lang para mas madali. Anyway, dun sa paper, you may just indicate your student number, pero yung file nyo, just put your name. And then, if it's not really possible, kung for some reason hindi ka talaga naka-download ng app converting picture to PDF file, sige, you may submit in JPEG format, but please rename the file. Pero ano na yun na, last resort na yung class kung talagang hindi kaya ng PDF. You may submit a picture, but rename the files again with your surname. And then, if kasi more than one yun, so kunwari, Lorenzana 1, Lorenzana 2, Lorenzana 3. Okay? So, paturo kayo kay Mr. Santos kung anong gagawin. Share naman, Mr. Santos, ano bang na-pressure siya. Uy, wag kang pa-pressure, joke lang yon. So, it's an inspiration ka. So, we should aspire to do better. Compete with ourselves, not with others. So, nung nasa law school ako, pagka mas mataas yung grade ko ng finals, masaya na ako. Kahit na marami pang mas mataas sa akin sa class. So, don't look at the scores of your classmates. Look at your own scores. Compete with yourself. Okay? Questions? Do you have any questions? Comments? Suggestions? And this is our final quote. Yes.
Ba ng caps lock sa exam? Naka-all caps po.
Anong all caps?
Yung sagot po.
I encourage you, class, to please write in uppercase and lowercase. Huwag kayong mag-all caps. Kasi pag bumalik yung bar exam sa written, medyo siya. Tsaka mahirapan kayo. It's not the proper way of writing na naka-all caps. Okay? Tsaka parang galit, Miss Angeles. Huwag kang all caps. Parang kang sumisigaw. Huwag ganon. Diba sa text, kapag ka naka-receive ka ng all caps sa nanay mo, diba? Parang sumisigaw. Huwag ganon. Mag-mix ka. Kung ano the proper capitalization. Alam mo yung sa anak ko sa grade 1, tinuturo yan sa kanila kung kailan yung proper capitalization. So, gawin din natin yun. Nasa law school na tayo. Mr. Moya, I think I reminded you to please improve your handwriting. Alam niyo class, I prefer that you write in print kesa cursive. Kasi although usually maganda yung cursive nyo, kung tingin nyo maganda talaga yung cursive nyo, pag nagmamadali na kayo class, pare-pareho na lang itsura ng cursive. Para na talaga siyang kinahig ng manok. So, mas okay yung in print. Ha? Kasi kahit magmadali ka, at least medyo magkakahiwalay pa rin yung letter, so hindi siya masyadong masakit sa ulo i-check, Mr. Moya. Ha?
Yes, Judge. Sorry po.
I understand mas mabilis yung iba sa inyo magsulat in cursive. Mas maano nga naman kasi tuloy-tuloy siya eh. Pero you try to, when I was teaching legal writing, I would ask my students to submit their digest in handwritten format. So I would also ask them to submit memoranda in handwritten format. Kasi I really want my students to practice their handwriting, their penmanship. So, pero hindi ko alam kung magiging handwritten pa talaga yung bar exam or tuloy-tuloy na ang online. Okay, so might as well. You really need to learn how to write properly. Okay? Any questions? Any other questions, class?
Judge, I have a question po.
Go.
Judge, when should we apply po special mitigating circumstance in a situation wherein a minor does a crime that is
Special or
punishable?
privilege?
Yung minority po, Judge, I'm confused
Yes,
pa.
privilege mitigating circumstance yan, Mr. Kanya.
Ayun po, Judge. When do we apply that in a situation wherein if a minor commits a crime that is punishable by the death penalty, should we apply it after the should we apply it immediately to make the penalty reclusion perpetua, or should we maging death penalty muna?
We should follow
Uh,
the jurisprudence even if I don't agree with it. The People versus Bond. You check it. People versus Bond. So, baba mo muna, reclusion perpetua, and then apply privilege mitigating circumstance to get reclusion temporal.
okay po,
Although I
Judge.
don't
Thank you.
agree with that. Okay, so ganun talaga class, even though in my LTL class naman, legal technique and logic, I ask my students to choose cases that they don't agree with and then propose their own ruling and defend it before the class. So may mga ganyan talaga that we don't agree with the decisions of the court, and then that's how we evolve. We should not adopt everything. We should think for ourselves. Okay? Any other questions? No more? So this is our last quote. Grabe, naririnig nyo ba yung nag-video? Okay? Grabe, ang lakas. I hope you don't hear it. Ang kasal, grabe. Kasuhan ko kaya ito ng unjust vexation. Okay, so may you never be too old to search the skies on Christmas Eve class. This is just not about Santa, ha? Santa Claus. This is about may you maintain your idealism for as long as you can. Even if when you're already lawyers and when you're already judges, may you maintain, may you keep your idealism. Kasi when you lose your idealism and you become jaded realists, and dyan na nagsistart yung nawawalan, nagiging ka ng hopeless, nawawalan ka na ng trust, may mga trust issues ka na sa system, trust issues ka na sa mga tao. Okay? So, if you see injustice, it's your duty to correct it and to make the necessary change. So, wag kayo yung mga galit-galitan lang, mga jaded, realist, but you're never doing anything to correct it. Okay? There's always something good in everyone and everything. Okay, class. So with that, I hope next time we see each other, I can see you before my court, not as accused. Hopefully, Mr. Baluyot, no? Sana naman lang hindi as accused, but as colleagues. So probably counsels, fiscals, public attorneys, or fellow justices, nag-assume ma-appoint na justice. Or magiging kayong justice, magiging ko kayong boss in the future. So hopefully, ganon siya. So hindi akusado, ha? Or yung mga sinampahan ng small claims cases na nangutang na hindi nagbayad. Ha? I-deny ko talaga that you were ever my student. Ako. Mr. Rapal, baka bigla kang mag-appear doon, hindi ka nagbabayad ng utang daw. Ako po. Okay? So, thank you again, class. I will always remember that you helped our community pantry. So, we opened around 2 weeks ago again para nagpamaskong handog kami sa mga tao. So they were so happy. Thank you. Just for Cream 2, I don't teach Cream 2 yet, Mr. Fernandez. So isa-isa lang muna tayo. Nahihilo na nga ako dito, what with all the online classes of my kids. Nag-file pa ako nag-submit ako ng letter sa Office of the Court Administrator saying na please allow me to have my hearings from home dahil I'm assisting my toddler in her virtual classes. And then paggabi, meron naman yung isa, yung lalaki naman, may classes din. Sakit sa ulo, guys. Okay, so aral muna bago landi, guys. Yan ang ma-advise ko sa iyo. Yan ang takeaway ko talaga sa inyo. Huwag muna kayong masyadong lumandi. Ano to? Go ahead, Miss Santos. Ayun. So, pwede kayo maghanap kayo ng mga inspiration nyo, pero siguraduhin nyo na kapag nag-LQ kayo dyan, hindi maapektuhan yung pag-aaral nyo. Okay? Sige, Mr. Fernandez, ha? Pwede naman magpa-inspire. Pero kapag nakaka-apekto na sa pag-aaral, tigilan nyo na yan. Okay? So, I hope to see you in campus soon. Sana magkaroon na ulit ng face-to-face classes. And if ever we bump into each other in the halls of the main building, you just try to greet me. Mamansin naman kayo, class. Baka hindi niyo ako pansinin. Okay? So, I'll see you when I see you. And stay safe and Merry Christmas. So,
Judge?
let's have our, yes?
I was just about to say, can we take our class picture po?
Yes. We're going to, okay, sorry. First screen, 1, 2, 3. Next. Thank you so much, class. You've been awesome. And please study well for your finals, not only for CRIM, but also for the rest of your subjects. And I hope you'll enjoy your Christmas vacation, if any, because you'll have to study for your finals. But I hope you can still squeeze in some time for your loved ones. And also, of course, for yourself. Okay? Stay safe and God bless. If you need anything, wag lang pera, you can message me for anything. You may ask me for some if you have any question, nahuli kayo, nag-jaywalking kayo. Okay? So, that's it, class. Gutom na si Miss Montalvo, so baka mapagalitan na naman tayo for the last time. God bless, class, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you,
Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
Happy holidays,
Merry
Judge.
Christmas.
Thank
So,
you. Merry Christmas. Merry
Thank you,
Christmas.
Judge.
Here po.